Welcome to Artificiality, the podcast from Helen and Dave Edwards from Sonder Studio. We created Sonder Studio to empower humans in our complex age of machines, data, and AI. Through our strategy, innovation, and change services, we help organizations activate the collective intelligence of humans and AI. We work with leaders in tech, data, and analytics to co-create AI strategies, design innovative AI products and services, and craft change management programs that help their people succeed in an AI-powered, data-centric, complex world. We leverage the new world of foundation models, generative AI, and low-code environments to create an amplified human-machine experience centered on machines that can be a mine for our minds. You can learn more about us at getsonder.com. Welcome back to Artificiality. Before we get going this week, we'd like to basically put out an offer or a request, or maybe it's an
invite.
It's
really.
an invitation, true, to anyone who's part of our listening group to join us in helping us craft a new product from Artificiality. We're looking for people who will help us give some feedback, give some reactions, give us some ideas for some new paid products coming from us. So if you're interested, please reach out. You can find us in lots of ways. The easiest, just send us an email at hello@getsonder.com.
The obvious being that if you do that, you get the paid stuff for free.
Yes, that would probably be good as the invitation.
To say that.
The punchline of the invitation. Yeah, help us out and get something free while you're doing it, and get to spend a little extra time with us, which we think is great because we spend time with ourselves all the time. So, all right. So this week, we're here to talk about culture.
We're still digging into mind for our mind.
We are. We're thinking about mind for our minds, and you'll be able to find a written companion to this podcast coming out shortly. But why don't you start off and give us some of your thoughts on culture and Sonder?
Okay. Well, this is something that a little thought experiment to run. So imagine that you're standing somewhere that's really busy. You know, I always think of like Grand Central Station because it's such an incredible space. And you stand there and you watch all of those people coming and going. And you wonder, you take a moment to wonder what are their inner lives and their inner thoughts and their idiosyncrasies and their worries and concerns and hopes.
Their idiosyncrasies.
Idiosyncrasies. Shout out to some friends in New Zealand. And you have you have this moment where you're kind of overcome with this feeling of the realization that all of these people have rich inner lives, as rich as yours, right? So that is Sonder. And that Sonder is almost this sort of meta-empathy, keeps us loyal to being human. And that's why we still ground our brand in Sonder. It's a very meaningful way of thinking about humans, I think. But when you start talking about when you don't want to use the word Sonder because people haven't heard of it so much, we talk about culture. And culture has a slightly different meaning. And like everything with AI these days, the more we try and really hone in on what a word means, like creativity or, in this case, culture, and think about what it means to have machines do those things too, or be involved in those things too, suddenly that crisp thought that you had about what you think it means starts to sort of kind of evaporate, kind of slips away from your fingers. And I think culture is doing that at the moment, that as we watch each other use ChatGPT or other generative AI, especially the fabulous imagery that sort of starts to express things that we want to create, these cultural artifacts of images and what have you. Culture becomes this, was that made by a human or was that made by a machine? And it starts to sort of almost twist around and play with that definition. So I think that, what we've done with thinking about mind for our minds and culture is to start pulling apart what the technology means when it's embedded in our culture. It is a cultural technology. It gives us access to the expertise of all the humans that have participated in the training data, which is, some people say parasitic, we say kind of stolen, but nevertheless useful and available for us. So we've got to, and a cultural technology isn't just what a product does. A cultural technology takes into account the origins of that technology. Where did it come from? Why did it come from where it came from? What came inherent with it? How does it change us as we use it? How do we pass it on to other people? How do we pass on things that we learn and use in that technology ourselves as individuals? How do we connect that up with the way other people use it? How does it inspire us or suppress us? How do we adapt to it as we adopt it? Is probably the kind of key thing to think about with a cultural technology. And we're seeing that rapidly, especially with ChatGPT, but with all the generative AI technologies, is we change as we adopt it.
I find it, the thought process that we often talk about is, as the human species evolved, we specialized, and that created great power. But one of the challenges was, how do you actually continue to get along, when you have these great specialties and these sort of, in some ways, gaps between each other. And one of the reasons you and I enjoy working together so much is that our brains work really quite differently. And so there's a specialization that we get to enjoy. And we come together through culture, through rituals, through stories, through art, through all kinds of experiences that bring us together. And I think that sort of through line is what's so powerful to me in thinking about generative AI as a cultural technology, because it is different from previous technologies, as we've talked about with Mind for Our Minds. These aren't tools. You didn't really need a new storyline to figure out how to come together to use a hammer, or any of other sort of tools. Maybe there are some things with some, but it's not really the sort of a cultural technology.
Well, even with what we now call traditional AI / predictive analytics, there's no. I mean, the closest we got to stories there really were around bias and ethics and responsible AI.
Sure. And
the stories that came up from people who weren't treated fairly in that process.
But these new technologies create and contribute unique new cultural artifacts, as you say, right? So new stories, new pieces of art. And the question then becomes, how does that become part of our culture? What new rituals do we need to have with these technologies or among ourselves while each of us are using these technologies, so that we still are brought together as a culture and not pushed apart? And I wonder how much the world is just rushing towards using the tools, right? It's the fastest growing digital service ever. 100 million people start using these things within a few months. And we don't truly understand what it means to come together using them. They're very sort of isolating tools in some ways, or they are isolated because we're using them alone. And when you start introducing people and work through, well, each of you now have some output of ChatGPT, I'm not quite sure what to do with that in terms of the ritual of how to come together with it.
Well, the ritual at the moment is that everyone's talking about it.
I guess that's true.
That it is the discussion
including
of the day.
Us.
And but that's our day job and our night job. That's what we talk about. I think I take what Peter Sterling, who we interviewed on the podcast a couple of years ago, I guess, brought to our consciousness the idea of the as we specialised, that others became we could think and operate and access the expertise of others and act as a community, do things that you couldn't as individuals, our social species. But it came with a flip side, which was we become, others are more foreign, and we need rituals, and I think he called them sacred practices, which are anything to their stories, their funerals, their art, that bring us together again. Bring us back together again and resolve those sort of the psychological stress of seeing others as more foreign. But the funny thing about that, I mean, not all of these technologies feel the same to use, right? Sometimes, and they don't even feel the same to use it within themselves. There's a lot of variation. Sometimes you can pull up ChatGPT or Bing or Bard, and it feels very foreign because it's so clearly acting as an AI today. I'm a large language model, I can't help you with that, or whatever. And then other times it can feel completely cohesive with your own mind because it's put something in front of you that was exactly what you were thinking, you just couldn't quite land it yourself. So I think all of these, what were easy distinctions to make between humans and machines, well, humans are creative, machines are not. That's obviously one that people are really started to question in the last 6 months, is culture becomes another one where there's no bright line between what human culture is and what human culture is with machines. The struggle right now is all the design is for individual use. There isn't collaborative use, and that is something that I think remains beyond our grasp to truly imagine that yet. We've actually got to, and that's one of the reasons why we say, like what everyone says, the only way you can learn these things is to use them. You have to develop your own mental model and your own machine intuition for how you like to use these tools. What's fun, what takes more time, what would have been easier just to do yourself, what's a process of discovery that you go through yourself. So I think we're in a very individualistic phase of using these tools, and we almost have to go through that before we know how to use them across the culture. That's why talking about them and having stories about them and talking about everything from the existential risk of AI down to like some tiny little bot that's, someone's just sort of, pulled, just made off in half an hour. Everything along that whole stack is actually important to talk about. Maybe the one thing that we shouldn't spend too much time on right now is machine consciousness. But, we should, it's really that whole stack that we should all be talking about, so that we do develop more stories around what it means to have these machines integrated with our thinking.
Question for you, which is around sort of the documentation of culture and the history of culture. So we have an increasing increasing history of documenting our human culture in books and art and in stories, and we're at this break point now where the documentation is now starting to grow and build that's coming out of the machine. And I wonder what you think about what that means for fast forward 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, and what it means to think about the accumulation of culture that has brought us together when so much of the new documentation that will be sort of, I guess, is part of our culture is going to be dominant, but dominantly or predominantly, generated by machines.
Well, let's think about that in a couple of different ways, because I think I understand what you're asking. On one hand,
that's good because it was a very clumsy question.
Go back and ask that question again. So on one hand, you've got some interesting research that's relatively recent, but because everything's recent, about the recursive nature of training models on things that they've already written. So and researchers have called it model collapse, where basically you the sort of long tail of the distribution just goes away. So this idea that you need humans to come in and creatively refresh everything that's online. Maybe. You can see that. You can definitely see that. I'm not saying that's wrong. But we have so much derivative content already that comes from humans. So it's more, that starts to get to, well, what's truly novel and what's truly creative and who's going to do that. So what does our culture end up, creativity ends up being almost this sort of cultural definition. Like, is it valuable because it's new, or is it valuable because it's human? Is it valuable because it comes from a machine and a human couldn't possibly see those correlations in such monstrous dimensions? So I think it's going to challenge all our words.
Yeah. Well, because if you think about stories and art being two core parts of our culture that bring us together, if machines become the ones that make more and more, and some point, some majority of the stories and the art, then is it just that the machines are bringing us together through culture? Is it the machine? I mean, we're directing this to at least for now, but what does that do to our culture when the machines are the ones that are creating the artifacts that bring us together? And I'm not sure what the answer is to that. It definitely,
well, some of it depends on your what you define as culture. To me, culture is the expertise of the whole of humanity. Mm-hmm. But to others, culture is a more specific definition around a particular culture, sure. Like a company culture. So the way that these technologies will get used in a progressive, open, diverse culture, if that's the company culture, will be really different than if it's a culture that is not collaborative, highly siloed, values internal competition. The cultures will be, the technologies will be used differently. And so that's one of there's so much journalism at the moment about the use cases for generative AI. So use it for this in marketing and blah, blah, blah. And then that people take that and extrapolate that to what it will do to those jobs. Well, depends. It's a cultural technology. It's going to depend on what the leaders in those companies and what people in those companies choose to do with this. It's always a choice, and I think that's an under discussed dimension of this right now, because there's an overarching cultural narrative about humans being kind of slow and but unreliable and bit lazy or whatever, that not good decision makers compared to machines. So the cultural narrative is to be better, faster, cheaper with machines, which is fine. We all want cheaper products and better products and what have you, and we all want to, spend more time doing more human level tasks, whatever that kind of means, because we're still unpicking that these days. And I think that's therein lies the detail, that within each and every company that has a different kind of cultural spin on this, they'll value different aspects of how this technology is used.
There's something sort of a technology history trend, I like these things, that sort of feels like we've talked in the past about how computers move from, the machine room to the desktop to the pocket, and to now on your wrist or whatever, getting closer and closer. But there's something that's about what we've used these tools for that's getting closer and closer. Like the desktop used to be a bit of an outsourced memory. That's where you'd sort of store things that you could go access periodic when you wanted. The phones become the way we communicate with others. We can sit and text each other when we're in different rooms in the house rather than walking
or the
across.
same room.
Or the same room. Sometimes to have conversations that the children can't hear. But now we're using these generative AI tools to actually create things, and that feels. I find my body sort of going, that's getting closer and closer to like my soul and who I am, that these tools have become that. And there is something that is very that does have each of these waves of computing have created new cultures for the people who were using them, right? So there was the initial wave of people who were white collar workers using PCs at work. That goes back a long time. Then there's the people who were spending a lot of time online, and they were the first people who were actually really working in the internet. And then the digital natives and the mobile natives, and now there's going to be the Gen AI natives, I'm sure, right? But they create new groups and new cultures, and you're either part of that group or you see that group as an other, as another group that you're not quite sure that you don't necessarily find the same cultural bonding. And that's going to be interesting to see what happens here. I mean, this new culture of people who are using generative AI is remarkably large in such a short period of time. And I wonder,
and it is very accelerative.
Sure.
And it's fun.
Yeah.
It's really that some of these early productivity figures, and speed on bits and pieces, how fast you can generate a social media post or a new code or whatever. That's the tip of the iceberg in terms of what really matters, because that's what we can measure today. But what really matters is as these things are more broadly used, and as does it really? What does it do? Does it pull the bottom up, or does it send the top accelerating even further to create an even sort of more unequal cultural divide between those who really understand the technology and those who don't? And there's a lot of what seemed like science fiction in terms of the cyborg human is actually much more easy to see now for a variety of reasons, including all of the sort of brain neuro device and neurometric kind of work that's going on. But and it's interesting that you talk about the cultural. We started out talking about humans as a species, and Hannah Critchlow alerted me to some really interesting research that was done recently by the Royal Society that came out with a sort of an overarching conclusion that our cultural evolution is now faster than our genetic evolution. And our cultural choices are driving our evolution faster than our genes. Isn't that incredible?
It is.
And there's I think the example that was given in the research was how caesarean section is now, that a daughter born by caesarean section now has a higher chance of having to have a caesarean section when she has her own children herself, which I think is just the most extraordinary piece of data. And if you extend that to this particular style of AI, where we can think quite differently and we can learn different skills faster, or we can access the knowledge of humanity just so naturally and so in such a combinatorially satisfying way, the way we can mix and match ideas, that what we think of as creativity and what we think of as change and decision making is going to be profoundly different. And those who move faster on this could become quite culturally different.
They sure could. I think it's the interesting question is how to move quickly and how to actually, because the quickly is not necessarily, becoming the expert prompter.
Oh no, it's kind of, what's that old saying, like more speed, less haste?
Yes. Right. This came up in the conversation we were having yesterday, that we were talking about this sort of speed with which that these systems can create things like a social media post. And one of the disconnects that I find is that it outputs it so quickly that it's almost too fast, right? And I'm not sure what's happening for me on a neuroscience level, that I'm sort of, it's like, whoa, that's too much that happened too quickly in response to my question. I need a little bit more time to anticipate and predict what I think might happen.
Well, that's what I was kind of getting at. I mean, the gurus of thinking through what happens with AI and decision making, Agrawal and et al. They talk about, and we adopt this a lot because it's an incredibly useful tool, that decisions are predictions plus judgment. And in our head, those two go together. And now when we use everyone using these tools, that process of the prediction, which is like what you think about something, which is suddenly appears on the screen, whether it's an image or a paragraph, that used to be happen in the same moment in your head. It's like, that's good, that's bad, that's this, that's that, that's creative, that's not. Now the prediction is put up on the screen in front of you, and when you're using, say, Midjourney, you're sitting there going, oh, what's it going to come up with? What's it going to come up with? Oh, I make a judgment. But with ChatGPT, it's so fast. If it's a small, easy query, and you're startled, you instantly have to judge it. And what you thought you were asking for, that prediction, if it's off or it's on, you're making that judgment. And I think that's quite disruptive. It can be quite exciting, it can be quite fun. It can also be frustrating, but you're much more aware of your judgment now because it's separated out in your mind.
That speed of communication is fascinating. Like because the opposite side of it is there was the experiment that we ran for one of our clients in the workshop where we were showing off soul machines, right? Which is for those who don't know, it's an avatar system is the best way I like to describe it. I think they describe themselves now as digital humans or digital people. I can't remember what their phrase is now. But it's remarkable visually. You should definitely check it out. But they've now allowed your avatar to access the GPT API. And what was really sort of confusing is that the way the API is working today, and is that you have to package the entire question that you're asking, send it to the API, and then the API responds with an entire response, and then it comes back. And what it means is there's this long delay talking to your avatar. You ask a question that has to be recorded, sent to the API. An entire response has to be generated, which can be as long as you allow it to be in terms of the way you design your avatar. And then it comes back, and then it starts speaking. And it's so strange that I have these two opposite experiences. One where everything is entirely too slow, and it's very strange. And then other times things are entirely too fast, and it's really strange. But it's sort of, I don't know what that means for future of culture. I mean, perhaps there's some lesson learned that when we were both growing up, the only way we communicated at a distance was, there was the telephone, but other than that, you're writing a letter, and you sent it off, and it took a couple of days to get there, and then somebody took a few days to think about it, and then a couple of days to come back, and then you got a response. And now you fire off an email, and all of a sudden the response is there, and you're like, I really don't want to respond yet again.
Well, we're all recalibrating all of these things all of the time. And, we're recalibrating what we think is true. Mm-hmm. We're recalibrating what we think is machine generated. That recalibration is happening pretty fast. Doesn't mean we're immune from, being fooled by a deep fake. Not at all. Yeah. But I think that our ability to recalibrate and to move to the next stage in this journey is pretty fast, and that's one of the reasons why we advocate so much learning and hands-on and having someone and working in a team with this, not just sort of being isolated and not being honest about using it at work, for example. Sure. The more that you as and your teams are using these technologies and being really clear about it and saying, hey, well, this is what this said. Why don't we make this the starting point? Oh, I don't agree with that. I mean, there's so many ways that it accelerates some of the more difficult sort of early starting blank page writer's block, whatever you want to put it. That's a common experience.
Sure.
I've often wondered whether it's called mid-journey because it gets you to the mid-journey of the creative process.
I like that. I think we picked that up from Jonathan Colton.
Yeah.
So anyway, so this is great. Before we close off, just want to highlight for listeners that we have expanded what we do on Artificiality. And if you haven't noticed, please go to artificiality.substack.com. We're back writing, which is great fun. And we're also adding in video interviews with AI entrepreneurs and innovators that we're posting up on YouTube. And you can access all of this through Substack. And at the moment, we're sending out one email a week that has the content and all the links to it.
And by popular request, I'm actually making an effort to put up all my book reviews.
By popular request, meaning me saying please.
Oh, no, there's a lot of other people who say, what are you reading right now?
Yes, exactly. So it's true. So Helen's also posting a book recommendation once a week, which is fantastic. So, and at the moment, we're sending out one email to spare people's inboxes, looking for feedback on that. So if people want to get it more often, please let us know too. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much. And we'll be back in your ears again in a week.
Happy 4th.
Happy 4th of July. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe on Substack or your favorite podcast platform. And please leave a positive rating or comment. Sharing your positive feedback helps us reach more people and connect them with the world's great minds. Seriously, a review on Apple Podcasts is a big deal. And if you like how we think, then contact us about our speaking and workshops and human-centered product design. You can learn more about us at getsonder.com, and you can contact us at hello@getsonder.com. You can learn more about making better decisions in our book, Make Better Decisions: How to Improve Your Decision-Making in the Digital Age. The book is an essential guide to practicing the cognitive skills needed for making better decisions in the age of data, algorithms, and AI. Please check it out at mbd.zone, on Amazon, bookshop.org, or place an order through your favorite local bookstore.
Solid state.